Ladies and gentlemen, James Lane here, and I've been up all night going through this 106-page landmark historic case filed by Sidney Powell at the bowels of midnight right into Thanksgiving. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to blow your mind. So, on the 42nd episode of the American Reveille Podcast, the Thanksgiving special, I promised you I'd reveal the Kraken, and that's absolutely what I'm about to do. Stay tuned. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 42nd episode of the American Reveille Podcast. This is the 26th of November, the last Thursday in the month of November, which means it's Thanksgiving. So grab your turkey, grab your mashed potatoes, get your stuffing. If you don't like turkey, get some ham, get some pot roast. That's what I've got in the slow cooker right now for the family, some pot roast. But strap in, because this is going to be a long-ass podcast. Folks, if you are listening and not watching, whether you're listening on Audible, Apple Podcasts, all of those different Spotify, if you're listening, I'm actually wearing sunglasses right now, so I felt I would explain it to the people that are actually watching on Rumble and on my channel and on everything like that. I was up all night, guys, going through this. Do you see this? This is the 106-page document, all right, that I actually went through. I've got sticky notes in there. I've done all of the homework for you so I could cut through the minutia and the BS and actually get to the meat of this thing. Even doing that, it's still going to be a hell of a lot of reading, a hell of a lot of talking. I'm expecting this podcast to go for a while. This might end up being the longest podcast I've ever done. So if you're looking for a little entertainment while people are cooking, or, you know, maybe you don't have much family around, maybe you're in a blue state like me where they seem to be coming door to door to throw you into the gulag, whether, you know, if you've got too many maskless people in your house, which is ridiculous, by the way, but I'm going to try my best not to get on too many segues during this episode. You all know how I love to talk. So we're going to try to stay focused, guys. We're going to try to stay focused. So what I want to do is I'm going to kind of do an overview of how this episode's going to go, because it's such a long episode. And for those listening, I'm pulling up on the screen basically all of the pages I went through where the pertinent information lies. So if you're looking for a guide of how I went through this episode, you're about to get it right now. Not how I went through the episode. Well, it's how the episode's structured, but how I went through the actual document that I'm holding up that Sidney Powell filed just basically this morning. You would call it this morning. It's after midnight practically. So on page 2, we're looking at the nature of the action, which is like the overall picture of what's happening. Page 22, we then go to after we read some from there, which is the defendant's unauthorized actions that violated the Georgia election code and caused the processing of defective absentee ballots. And I'm warning you right now, this lawsuit is the whole shebang. I know a lot of people aren't really talking about it. I'm sure the experts out there are doing their analysis and trying to get you guys some great information, but I wanted to get it hard and heavy and get it to you ASAP, so I stayed up all night and did the best I could here. But I promise you, by the end of this, if you stick with me, even if it comes out to 2 hours, 3 hours, if you stick with me, you're going to know exactly what kind of wrath the Democrats and the left are facing if this is a successful lawsuit, because I'm telling you, this is nuts. It's the whole kitchen sink. It's everything that Sidney Powell promised and more, and there is evidence documented in here, and we're going to go through it. So look, page 32, which starts this second section here, evidence of fraud, and it's a pattern showing the absence of mistake. And then 37 is the voting machines. Secrecy software used by voting machines throughout Georgia is crucial to this case. Then it's page 44. Smartmatic systems have massive end-user vulnerabilities. And then 56 shows even more additional specific fraud. And we're not going to totally read through entire sections. We may in some of them. But there's going to be tons of legal jargon in here. I'm going to try to skip through a lot of that as much as I can. By the way, if you're wondering what my qualifications are for this, if this is the first time you're watching me, listening to me, hearing my soothing, beautiful voice, folks, I do hold an MBA in business management. I'm not a lawyer. I'm telling you that right now. So there's no waiver I'm signing. I'm not giving you any legal advice. I'm just deciphering this as a person that understands business, understands contracts, understands legal minutia. And I'm also a PhD student on dissertation. So I'm letting you know right now, I understand how to research, how to find the meat and the gravy and the bone, the good stuff that's inside the marrow, right in the meat of the research, pull it out, organize it like I'm showing you, and deliver it back. That's what a PhD is basically all about anyway. So folks, stick with me. I'm telling you, you're going to get the great info, okay? 59 here. Multiple expert reports and statistical analysis prove hundreds of thousands of votes were lost or shifted that cost the president and the Republican candidates of congressional districts 6 and 7 their races. Those are the runoff races that they're talking about right now in Georgia, where you see all these celebrities and all these rich people pouring millions of dollars into the crooked and corrupt Democrat Party. This case wins. It squashes all of that. Screw your special election. Screw your, crooked Democrat rules. This fixes some stuff, folks. The Secretary of State in Georgia counties also violated the 14th Amendment. So all of you guys wondering about the 14th Amendment, what it is, what's happening, why aren't people being prosecuted under it? That section is going to cover the 14th Amendment, and we're going to get hot and heavy in there as well. 83 is the denial of due process on the right to vote. 86, there was widespread ballot fraud. And then 99 is the request for relief, which is basically asking the judge to make a decision in the favor of the people basically filing this and asking. So this is going to be a long one, folks. It's going to be a very long episode. Like I said, these are pertinent pages. There's a lot more info in there. Feel free to go through and dig. But there's a ton of minutia, a ton of crap. And even though it's important to know, it would have just made this a 5-hour episode, and you would have had your head spinning much more than it will already be spinning by the time we get to the end of this. So, folks, let's get started. All right, so we've got our documents. I've got my big water here because this is going to be a long one, and I don't want to sound like crap every 20 minutes, so you're going to have to bear with me. Drinking a little bit of water here on the side and keeping my palate moist, for those who love that word. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get to it. The nature of the action. And what I did here, by the way, is I basically opened all the pertinent pages. So try to streamline it for you so you don't have to watch me going, where do I go? What do I do? I am prepared to hand you the knowledge to basically be a voice for this nation. You've got so many naysayers, so many people that are denying that this is even a thing. You've got mainstream media pretending that this news doesn't exist. So you're going to be armed with that information, and you're going to be able to be a better digital soldier. Keep your mouth open, use that First Amendment, and spread the knowledge across the land. Ladies and gentlemen, the nature of the action, page 2 of this suit right here in the United States District Court, Northern District of Georgia, Atlanta Division. And remember, this is versus Brian Kemp, the governor, in his official capacity, Brad Raffensperger in his capacity as Secretary of State. This is against David J. Worley. He is on the state election board. This is Rebecca Sullivan. She is on the Georgia State Election Board. Matthew Mashburn. He is the Georgia State Election Board dude. Those are the defendants. This is basically a corruption case, ladies and gentlemen. This is not against some random ghost out there. This is against people, mainly the governor, mainly the Secretary of State, these election officials. You're going to see exactly how they were involved in some horrible, horrible stuff as we go through this. But there's a place to start. It's at the beginning, and it's the nature of the action. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get to it. This civil action brings to light a massive election fraud, multiple violations of Georgia laws, and multiple constitutional violations as shown by fact witnesses to specific incidents, multiple expert witnesses, and the sheer mathematical impossibilities found in the Georgia 2020 general election. Now, this was filed in Georgia, but a case like this will go up all the way to the Supreme Court after a while, and then they will make rulings that shed light across this entire country. Let's keep going. As a civil action, the plaintiff's burden of proof is a preponderance of the evidence to show, as the Georgia Supreme Court has made clear, that I was not incumbent upon the plaintiff to show how the voters would have voted if their absentee ballots had been regular. The plaintiff only had to show that there were enough irregular ballots to place doubt in the result. And so basically what that's saying is that you're casting doubt. You have to have reasonable doubt, just like in any other case. And that was decided by Meade versus Sheffield. All right. There's other cases and all that, but this is just a little setup that's basically there to say what the burden of proof is for Sidney Powell, even though, and that's just a Georgia Supreme Court thing, even though this is going to shed even greater light. Let's keep going a little. The scheme and the artifice to defraud was for the purpose of illegally and fraudulently manipulating the vote count to make certain the election of Joe Biden as the president of the United States. That's big. That is saying that all of this fraud was there for the sole purpose, knowingly, for the sole purpose of making a man who didn't rightfully win an election the president of the United States. That's treason and corruption at the highest level. This is big. The fraud was executed by many means, but the most fundamentally troubling, insidious, and egregious is the systemic adaptation of old-fashioned ballot stuffing. These are old tricks, folks. It has now been amplified and rendered virtually invisible by computer software created and run by domestic and foreign actors for that very purpose. Mathematical and statistical anomalies rising to the level of impossibilities as shown by affidavits of multiple witnesses, documentation, and expert testimony evince this scheme across the state of Georgia. And like we said, if it comes to show that it did happen across the state of Georgia, this software is used across the country. I think it was up to 30 states used Dominion. So this is going to open a bombshell. All right. Especially egregious conduct arose in Forsyth, Paulding, Cherokee, Hall, and Barrow County. This scheme and artifice to defraud affected tens of thousands of votes in Georgia alone has rigged the election in Georgia for Joe Biden. Excuse me. Let me do that one more time. This scheme and artifice to defraud affected tens of thousands of votes. Basically, let me break that down because it's an annoyingly complicated sentence. This whole thing is a scheme. This big fraud, this election fraud, this voter fraud in Georgia, it was a scheme, a known setup to screw over tens of thousands of registered Georgia voters and rig the election in Georgia to go in the favor of Joe Biden no matter what happened. And we know Georgia's traditionally red. We know Trump won the hell out of Georgia. And I needed to clarify that sentence for you because it's kind of legally written. But it basically means that what happened was BS. It was a fraud. It was a scheme. It was a trick. It was a dupe. It was a setup. They used that to take tens of thousands of Trump voters and cast them to the side, take away their legal rights to vote, and rig the election, and basically do some mafia-like crap and make sure Georgia, no matter what, went to the way of certifying for Joe Biden. That's what that says in that part right there, guys. This massive fraud, it begins with the election software and hardware from Dominion Voting Systems Corporation, only recently purchased and rushed into use by defendants Governor Brian Kemp, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, and the Georgia Board of Elections. Sequoia voting machines were used in 16 states and the District of Columbia in 2006. Smartmatic, which has revenue of about $100 million, focuses on Venezuela and other markets outside the United States of America. After selling Sequoia, Smartmatic's chief executive, Anthony Mugica, I hope I said that right. Actually, I don't really care if I said that right because these are all crooks, but Mr. Mugica said he hoped Smartmatic would work with Sequoia on projects in the United States, though Smartmatic wouldn't take an equity stake. Smartmatic and Dominion were founded by foreign oligarchs and dictators to ensure computerized ballot stuffing and vote manipulation to whatever level was needed to make certain Venezuelan dictator Hugo Chavez never lost another election. And they're referring in here, like you see redacted whistleblower affiant attached as Exhibit 2. Notably, Chavez, see what I'm saying? There's a lot of legal jargon. That's what I'm trying to cut through. So basically, there's evidence attached to her statements. It's just like if you were writing a paper for college or something, you would have to reference your sources. You'd have to write, like if you were making a statement, you would say, John stated such and such, page 13, book number, whatever, depending on how you were doing it. I'm not going to get too far into that, but sourced and cited material. Sourced and cited material, ladies and gentlemen. That's what's important. And we have sourced and cited evidence, as notably shown by Exhibit 2. Exhibit 2 shows and proves this, and that's what they're going to try to prove to the court. It's going to show that Smartmatic and Dominion were founded by foreign oligarchs and dictators to ensure computerized ballot stuffing and vote manipulation to whatever level was needed to make certain Venezuelan dictator Hugo Chavez never lost another election. That's what they're going to use to prove that to the judge. As set forth in the accompanying whistleblower affidavit, the Smartmatic software was designed to manipulate Venezuelan elections in favor of dictator Hugo Chavez. And let's read this for a second. Smartmatic's electoral technology was called Sistema de Gestión Electoral, the electoral management system. Smartmatic was a pioneer in this area of computing systems. Their system provided for the transmission of voting data over the internet to a computerized central tabulating center. And for a second, let me say something. They've been finding, just like in Pennsylvania in the hearings the other day, they had testimony up there, not in Georgia, but in Pennsylvania at Gettysburg, talking about how these Dominion machines were hooked to the internet, even though they weren't supposed to be. There were USB drives. I think 48 have gone missing now. They're talking about some crazy stuff was revealed in Pennsylvania, but a ton of stuff's been revealed in Georgia too. And that's why Michigan, Wisconsin, all of these places are starting to investigate. You see, the left was betting on Trump conceding for some crazy reason, and he didn't. And now the house of cards that they have built are starting to topple, ladies and gentlemen. And that's what you're seeing. Look, the voting machines themselves had a digital display, fingerprint recognition feature to identify the voter, and printed out the voter's ballot. The voter's thumbprint was linked to a computerized record of that voter's identity. Smartmatic created and operated the entire system, folks. That's a big deal. A core requirement of the Smartmatic software design was the software's ability to hide its manipulation of votes from any audit. As the whistleblower explains, Chavez was most insistent that Smartmatic design the system in a way that the system could change the vote of each voter without being detected. He wanted the software itself to function in such a manner that if the voter were to place their thumbprint or fingerprint on a scanner, then the thumbprint would be tied to a record of the voter's name and identity as having voted, but that voter would not be tracked to changed votes. Do you see that? There's not they literally have a design in their system. Right here it says it. They have a design in their system that, yes, it would look like they're tracking the votes because it would tie a thumbprint or fingerprint to a person, to their identity. But if that vote was then later removed and put on someone else, there would be no audit capabilities. He made it clear that the system would have to be set up to not leave any evidence of the changed vote for a specific voter, and that there would be no evidence to show that, and nothing to contradict that the name or the fingerprint or thumbprint was going with any changed vote. Smartmatic agreed to create such a system and produced the software and hardware that accomplished that result for President Chavez. See Exhibit 3. They have evidence tied to this, ladies and gentlemen. They keep saying, where's the evidence? There's no evidence. Like they're waiting for Dick Tracy or, some Inspector Gadget type of guy to come through with a magnifying glass and go, aha, and pull up a box of evidence. It's not 1970, ladies and gentlemen. There's plenty of digital evidence. There are crumbs lying around in the shadows of the online world, folks. And those crumbs will become the evidence because they've been put together by statisticians and PhD professors and plugged through their machines, basically, their mathematical algorithms and machines to show that there is hard evidence. Data has been used basically to prove this. So I don't want to hear the left saying there's no evidence, because the old school evidence world doesn't exist. And they're counting on you have watched, they're counting that on you watching too many episodes of, 24, too many episodes of NCIS and thinking that they're going to come through with some box of evidence. It's not going to happen. All right. The evidence is there and it's going to be proved at the highest level, and the left's minds are going to be blown. And then we're going to have some chaos to deal with, but we'll talk about that later. The design and features of the Dominion software do not permit a simple audit to reveal its misallocation, redistribution, or deletion of votes. First, the system's central accumulator does not include a protected real-time audit log that maintains the date and timestamps of all significant election events. They're going to find when they seize and audit these machines, this is what this is saying right here, they're going to find that there is no actual log. The computer does not check this. There's no timestamp. There's no date stamp. It does not check anything about the misallocation, redistribution, or deletion of votes, which means the statisticians are going to have to use math to prove this. And that's what they've been doing. So when you hear the left say that, again, they're full of crap. Key components of the system utilize unprotected logs. Essentially, this allows an unauthorized user the opportunity to arbitrarily add, modify, or remove log entries, causing the machine to log election events that do not reflect actual voting tabulations, or more specifically, they do not reflect the actual votes or the will of the people. And again, see Hursty, August 29th. There's all of this right here. All of this right here. There's Exhibit 4. You can go through this. I'm not going to go crazy with it, but they couldn't have written this down for a suit in the court of law without having evidence attached. All right. Indeed, under the professional standards within the industry in auditing and forensic analysis, when a log is unprotected and can be altered, it can no longer serve the purpose of an audit log. There is incontrovertible physical evidence that the standards of physical security of the voting machines and the software the software itself were breached, and machines, that's what screwed me up, were connected to the internet in violation of professional standards and state and federal laws. And we've seen the testimony for that in Pennsylvania. We're hearing it come out of counties in Georgia. We're seeing it all over the country. It's absolutely unethical, absolutely wrong. It should be prosecuted. It is treason, in my opinion. It truly is undermining the presidential election, the Senate election, the Congress. Undermining elections in the United States of America should be tried to the highest extent as treason. And I know that you agree with me, ladies and gentlemen. So let's keep reading. Moreover, lies and conduct of Fulton County election workers about a delay in voting at State Farm Arena and the reasons for it evince the fraud. All right. That means it's showing the fraud. It's proving the fraud. Specifically, a video from the State Farm Arena in Fulton County shows that on November 3rd, after the polls closed, election workers falsely claimed a water leak required the facility to close. You remember that? When they stopped all of the voting in that place because of a water leak? We heard about that come out of Georgia, and they found nothing. We're going, what the hell is going on here? All poll workers and challengers were evacuated for several hours after 10 p.m. All right. About 10 p.m., folks, everybody was evacuated. However, several election workers remained unsupervised and unchallenged, working at the computers for the voting tabulation machines until after 1 a.m. That's very suspicious, ladies and gentlemen, isn't it? That's very suspicious. Defendants Kemp and Raffensperger rushed through the purchase of Dominion voting machines and software in 2019 for the 2020 presidential election. A certificate, and that rhino, Brian Kemp, by the way, that rhino, he wanted this. He brought this in. He pretended. He's Judas. He pretended to be Trump's friend, Trump's confidant. And meanwhile, he held a dagger, a serrated dagger behind his back with one hand while shaking the president's hand with the other. In 2019, they brought this software and they rushed the purchase of Dominion, even after it failed in so many tests in so many places for the presidential election. A certificate from the Secretary of State was awarded to Dominion voting system, but it's undated. I wonder why. And they obviously have evidence attached to. That's Exhibit 5. You can look it up. Similarly, a test report is signed by Michael Walker as project manager, but is also undated. Coincidence? Why are they undated? Why is millions and millions of dollars worth of software purchasing for the presidential election? Why is that not notarized, double checked, T's crossed, I's dotted? I don't understand how you could have things undated in this type of. So this isn't just people being incompetent when it happens multiple times, ladies and gentlemen. That's called intent. And that is Exhibit 6. That's evidence, folks. Defendants Kemp and Raffensperger disregarded all the concerns that caused Dominion software to be rejected by the Texas Board of Elections in 2018. And imagine if it wasn't. Imagine if they used Dominion in Texas. We'd be looking at a blue Texas right now, and everybody would really be scratching their damn heads. Namely, that it was vulnerable to undetected and non-auditable manipulation. An industry expert, Dr. Andrew Apple, Princeton professor of computer science and elections security expert, has recently observed, with reference to Dominion voting machines, I figured out how to make a slightly different computer program that just before the polls were closed, it would switch some votes around from one candidate to another. I wrote that computer program into a memory chip, and now to hack a voting machine, you just need 7 minutes alone and a tiny screwdriver. Folks, Exhibit 7. That is evidence. There is evidence that shows this, okay? You're going to see evidence when this gets argued in the court that shows that somebody wrote this computer program you could put in a memory chip and hack these voting machines with 7 minutes and a screwdriver. As explained and demonstrated in the accompanying redacted declaration of a former electronic intelligence analyst under the 305th Military Intelligence. This is no joke, folks. These aren't bums off the street. These aren't vagrants. These aren't meth heads. These aren't crackheads, if you know who I'm talking about. These are qualified individuals. A former electronic intelligence analyst under the 305th Military Intelligence with experience gathering SAM missile system electronic intelligence. The Dominion software was accessed by agents acting on behalf of China and Iran in order to monitor and manipulate elections, including the most recent U.S. general election in 2020. This declaration further includes a copy of the patent records for Dominion systems in which Eric Coomer is listed as the first of the inventors of Dominion voting systems. Ladies and gentlemen, this is no joke. Again, you have somebody who professionally did this for the military, who analyzed this and says that it is fraud, that people from Iran, people from China are stealing our election along with Sleepy Joe Biden and the rest of the crooked Democrat crew who are lining their damn pockets and have been for years. What the hell do you think the deep state is? Folks, let's keep going. Expert Navid Keshavarz-Nia, I hope I said that correct, explains that the U.S. intelligence services had developed tools to infiltrate foreign voting systems, including Dominion. That's CIA type stuff right there. That's something I was curious about too. I asked earlier on Parler if people thought that because of this paragraph here, the Kraken could also be a type of program developed by the government that was used to root out such corruption and anomalies. But we're not going to know that unless it comes out in the court. It's just speculation that I got by reading through this. But you make your own I'm saying the wrong word there. You make your own judgment. Let's just use the word judgment. He concludes that hundreds of thousands of votes were cast for President Trump in the 2020 general election and were transferred to former Vice President Biden. These were altered and manipulated votes that only took place in battleground states, folks. Additionally, incontrovertible evidence, Board of Election Records demonstrates that at least 96,600 absentee ballots were requested and counted, but were never recorded as being returned to county election boards by the voter. Thus, at a minimum, 96,600 votes must be disregarded. That makes sense, and there is Exhibit 9 showing evidence. Guys, this is just us scratching the surface, and we're already in this for over 30 minutes. This is going to be a big episode. If I jumble my words a little bit, I apologize. This is written in legal jargon, and I am having to translate that legal jargon into my head and out of my mouth in real time, like having that fish in the ear from the movie and book Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you haven't seen it, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit of a nerd, which is why I have the ability to go through a 106-page document. And if you have seen it, I'm sure you're laughing. The Babelfish, I believe they called it. But ladies and gentlemen, the Dominion system used in Georgia erodes and undermines the reconciliation of the number of voters and the number of ballots cast, such that these figures are permitted to be unreconciled, opening the door to ballot stuffing and fraud, meaning you can't check them, you can't validate them. So why not fraud the system? And that's exactly what happened. The collapse of reconciliation was seen in Georgia's primary and runoff elections this year, and in the November election, where it was discovered during the hand audit that 3,300 votes were found on memory sticks that were not uploaded on election night. Plus, in Floyd County, another 2,600 absentee ballots had not been scanned. These votes reduced Biden's lead over Donald Trump. Now, you remember these stories coming out on Gateway Pundit and on other sites like Epic Times. Even the Daily Wire had some stories, some honest reporting on all of this. I think I forgot to mention Breitbart does good stuff on this. We saw bits and pieces of this, but some of this is going to sound familiar. But when I'm done with this, when we go through the whole thing, you're really going to have the big picture. You may have to listen to this podcast in chunks, or you may be like me that can consume multiple hours of data at one time. Either way you want to do it, I hope you're enjoying this delicious sandwich that I'm trying to bring to you. But we're going to be putting things together that you haven't heard and things that you have heard. And obviously, we've heard of these votes that were found. We just didn't understand the context and how they relate. And this is showing how they relate. Those votes found reduced Biden's lead over Trump, which means that if we did a full audit, we could probably expect that there's a ton other votes that were found to not only not be uploaded, but be switched, which would mean that Donald Trump would probably be the winner. And because they made it in a way that you can't technically audit some of this stuff, they should just disqualify those 96,600 votes. And I agree with them. And I'm sure some judges in high places, say Clarence Thomas maybe, might agree with it too. Georgia's election officials and poll workers exasperated and helped, whether knowingly or unknowingly. The Dominion system carries out massive voter manipulation by refusing to observe statutory safeguards for absentee ballots. Election officials have failed to verify signatures and check security envelopes. They barred challengers from observing the count as well, which facilitated the fraud. And we all know that to be true. Expert analysis of the actual vote set forth below demonstrates that at least 96,000 votes, 96,600 votes were illegally counted during the Georgia 2020 general election. All of the evidence and allegation herein is more than sufficient to place the result of the election in doubt. More evidence arrives by the day, and discovery should be ordered immediately. And that's what's going to bring down these people in the long run. I'm going to tell you that early on. When this gets to a high enough level in the courts, they're going to have to order what's called discovery. All right. They're going to have to order this on Dominion, Smartmatic, all of these people. And they're going to go in. They're going to seize this stuff. I bet you, look, we know Dominion's been closing up shop, boarding up the business. 100 plus of their employees have scrubbed their social media or deleted it entirely off the internet. People can't find people from their boards of directors. We can't find their key leadership. We have them saying, oh, we did nothing wrong. And then we're seeing videos of them, real videos, hard evidence of them from a couple years ago, showing people and explaining to people exactly how they were able to use this software to fraud the system. It's not like it's an accident or like it's a design flaw. It's in their instruction manual. It's part of the system. It's what it's there for, guys. This is horrible corruption and treason, horrible software designed to screw you and me, the little people in this country, in the highest and most intelligent of ways, while hoping we're not stupid, or while hoping we're stupid enough, not stupid, but hoping we're stupid enough to look the other direction and have the memory of goldfish. This is ridiculous stuff, folks. Ridiculous stuff. So we've gotten through the beginning part here. All right. We've gotten through this opening of some of the fraud, some of the stuff that we've been talking about and hearing about on the news, some of the stuff that Sidney Powell has brought forward. And this is really the starting of the complaint, the opening. And then you start getting into other sections. For example, defendants' unauthorized actions violated the Georgia election code and caused the processing of defective absentee ballots. So we went through page 1 through 11. We skipped through a chunk, and now we're starting on page 22. And that's how we're going to run through this in this episode, because if I sat here and read the whole thing, again, this would be 9 freaking hours. You'd be sleeping. You're probably already like, come on, get it out already. But like I said, this is for the folks that want that in-depth review without having to sit through 106 pages and hang themselves. So bear with me. We're going to get through this. And in the end, you're going to, just like me, your mind's going to be blown and you're going to go, oh my God, this is one of the most landmark historic cases in the history, if not the most in the history of this country. And when combined with all the other cases that are happening, it's going to literally tear the walls down. Everything surrounding the deep state is on fire and crumbling right now, and this will be the killing blow. So in this section, we're going to talk about how Governor Kemp, the Secretary of State, all the defendants listed, how they violated the Georgia election code, and they caused the processing of defective absentee ballots. So before we get into the big things with, Dominion and all the other stuff, we're first talking about how the absentee ballots screwed the system and how it was supposed to be that way, how it was done by Brian Kemp and by the Secretary of State, how it was pushed forward. So let's get into it. Starting on page 22, notwithstanding the clarity of the applicable statutes and the constitutional authority for the Georgia legislature's actions, on March 6, 2020, the Secretary of State of the state of Georgia, Secretary Raffensperger, and the state election board who administer the state elections entered into a compromise and settlement agreement and release. This is a litigation settlement. This is a court document with the Democratic Party of Georgia, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, and the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, setting forth different standards to be followed by the clerks and registrars in processing absentee ballots in the state of Georgia. And I wonder, why would he do that? Why would he do that? That doesn't make any sense to me. How the Republican governor, who's supposed to be Trump's ally, would cut such a deal with the devil, ladies and gentlemen. Under the settlement, however, the administrators agreed to change the statutorily prescribed manner of handling absentee ballots in a manner that is not consistent with the laws promulgated by the Georgia legislature for elections in the state. And remember, the Constitution tells us, the general, not just Georgia's Constitution, but the big one, the big tamale, the hot pepper, the U.S. Constitution, folks. It tells us that the legislature decides how, when, who, what, where, why these elections are done and how they are decided upon. And folks, it is not consistent how the Secretary of State, how the governor of Georgia acted, what they did, the deal they made with the Democrat devils. What they did is not legal when you look at Georgia law. Let's keep going for a second. The settlement provides that the Secretary of State would issue an official election bulletin to county administrators, overriding the statutory procedures prescribed for those officials. That power, however, does not belong to the Secretary of State under the U.S. Constitution. That's what we're talking about. The settlement also changed the signature requirement, reducing it to a broad process with discretion rather than enforcement of the signature requirement as statutorily required under this law right here, OCGA 21-2-386 Alpha 1. That's why I'm not reading all of that to you, because your head would spin and it would make no sense, and it doesn't matter. But what I'm telling you is there is a law that has been broken because they broke, right here, they broke the enforcement of the signature requirement. That means that they're supposed to follow the law that states you have to verify the signature, and the Secretary of State and the governor said, screw that. We don't care if it's not your signature, whether it's verified or not, go forward with it, use it and count it as legal. That is against the law in Georgia, probably in most states. The Georgia legislature instructed county registers and clerks regarding the handling of absentee ballots. The Georgia Election Code instructs those who handle absentee ballots to follow a clear procedure. This is the procedure in Georgia in the book. All right, ladies and gentlemen, upon receipt of each absentee ballot, a registrar or clerk shall write the day and hour of the receipt of ballot on its envelope. The registrar or clerk shall then compare the identifying information on the oath with the information on file in his or her office, shall compare the signature or make an oath with the signature or mark on the absentee elector's voter card or the most recent update to such absent elector's voter registration card, an application for absentee ballot, or a facsimile of said signature or maker taken from said card or application, and shall, if the information, and I promise you I'll translate this, and signature appear to be valid and other identifying information appears to be correct, so certify by signing or initialing his or her name below the voter's oath. What that means is, by law, the person checking the absentee ballot, all right, they're supposed to look at it, look at the signature, look at their voter registration card, their ID, anything, that really, not anything, but what it says in there, their voter card or a recent thing with their signature on it. Regardless, they're supposed to check the signature. That's it. All right, they're supposed to check the signature, and the Secretary of State and governor ordered them not to. The law says check the signature, and you know how they're trying to get around it? With COVID. Of course, well, these aren't absentee ballots. These are mail-in ballots, mass mail-in ballots, 80+ million mail-in ballots. So they aren't pursuant to the law. That was their little loophole that they're trying to pull, ladies and gentlemen. These aren't absentee ballots. They're mail-in ballots. COVID. I'm sorry. You got to let us steal the election. No, we don't. Screw you, Democrats. Folks, The Georgia legislature provides procedures to ensure that any request for an absentee ballot must be accompanied by sufficient identification of the elector's identity. That's Georgia law, ladies and gentlemen. An affiant testified under oath that it was also of particular interest to see that signatures were not being verified and that there were no corresponding envelopes in sight. That's Exhibit 10. That's more evidence. We have so many sworn affidavits and so many examples of physical evidence. It's not even funny. The left is lying to the world. Lying to the world, ladies and gentlemen. To reflect the very reason for process, it was documented that in the primary election prior to November 3rd, 2020 presidential election, many ballots got to voters after the election. Further, it was confirmed that untold thousands of absentee ballots requests had been unfulfilled, and tens of thousands of mailed ballots were rejected for multiple reasons, including arriving too late to be counted. All right, there's more. See the Associated Press vote by mail worries. They're showing and sourcing information. This isn't just pulled out of Sidney Powell's ass. This is cited and sourced information, folks. Pursuant to the settlement, the administrators delegated their responsibilities for determining when there was a signature mismatch by considering in good faith only partisan-based training. Additional guidance and training materials drafted by the Democrat Party agencies' representatives are contradicting the law. Folks, that means that some people got the right instructions, and some people, oh, what did I do there? Excuse me, folks. I'm trying to fix something. Here we go. Sorry about that. If you're listening, I stopped because there was a little flash on the screen there, and the document I'm reading, the Sidney Powell case that she filed, flashed off the screen. So sorry about that, watchers, and sorry about that, listeners. Let's get back to brass tacks. So where were we? We're going to go now to the next one. We're going to start here on page 32, and we're going to start talking about, you see me looking up, it's because I got a big blow up of the, see all these little cards right here, guys? And if you're listening, I'm showing the Sidney Powell case. I got a big printed out version that I went through manually before I typed any of this crap up and looked it all up on the internet. But all of these notes right here, these sticky notes sticking out of the side, that's what's translated into my table of contents. And I'm using that to guide me through the show. So I have 3 monitors, and one is up in my little studio setup here. So I'm looking up there to see where we are so I can keep on task and get you the information you need without going down too many rabbit holes and too many tangents like I like to do normally. So this is page 32, evidence of fraud. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start talking about the patterns that are showing the absence of mistake. And this is just scratching the surface, all right? Where are we? How long have we been doing this? About 50 minutes, almost an hour. All right, guys. And we are scratching the surface. We're just getting into the evidence. I told you this is going to be a long one. I hope for the sake of my throat and my migraine, it's not too long, but it's going to be a long one. Let me take a sip of water, because as you can hear, my voice is starting to go downhill, and I haven't been doing this for 30 years like Glenn Beck. So hold your horses 1 second, ladies and gentlemen. Anyone else chew on ice cubes? It's a bad habit, I know. All right, so evidence of fraud. Let's get it started. The stunning pattern of the nature and acts of fraud demonstrate an absence of mistake. What does that mean? That means that there are patterns that show that this wasn't an accident, that someone didn't press the wrong button because they're dumb or were staring at their phone. This was intentional. This was fraud. This is criminal. The same affiant further replied in sworn testimony that the breach included, quote, when we did receive the machines, they were not sealed or locked. The serial numbers were not what were reflected on the related documentation. There's evidence in there too. Folks, if you've ever worked in any type of production, I've talked to you before about quality assurance and different things like that. I've worked in many jobs where you need to work on highly sensitive computers and on digital equipment. I was an electronics technician in the U.S. Navy. So as you can imagine, I've worked on some highly sensitive equipment. And whenever you get something like that in, even to repair it, even to program it, even to update the software, you have documentation where you have to match seals, match barcodes. You have to email things so you can get unlocking codes from certain people. When it's a matter of national security, and I've never dealt with anything at this level, because I'm sure this is top secret, super high Q level clearance stuff. When you deliver that crap, I bet my bottom dollar that it has to be sealed. It has to have the serials matched. So why wouldn't they do that? Why would they use machines that don't have that security protection? My guess, fraud, trying to steal the election. And I don't even think it's a guess at this point. An affiant testified that while in Henry County, I personally witnessed ballots cast for Donald Trump being placed into the pile for Joe Biden. I witnessed this happen on table A. They're giving exacts and they're swearing under the penalty of perjury, which puts people in jail 5 years, 10 years. It can put people in jail much longer for something at this level. When you're talking about the presidential election, we could probably put people in jail for life for treason for lying about this. So we need to take these allegations seriously, and they will. When you get at least up to the circuits and the Supreme Court, they're going to take this very seriously. And right now, Trump's just letting the left have a party, but we can see their visage slowly crumbling as we see them starting to panic in the news and tell us about the coup that they've been telling us about. When he tried to, when he did put in Amy Coney Barrett, they said he's going to overthrow the government. This is going to come down to the Supreme Court. Amy's going to make the final vote and it's going to be a coup. He's going to steal the election. They said that months ago. They're saying it again now. And even though that's not what's actually happening, it's what they're going to say when Trump wins the election because they call their own narrative. The left projects. They've been projecting this whole time, and they've projected, and they are projecting what they know is going to happen: Trump winning. And the collective left's minds are going to melt, and we're in for some craziness. But the affiant further testified, I'm going to segue back into this like Ben Shapiro segueing into an advertisement. The affiant further testified that when this was brought to Miss Pitt's attention, it was met with extreme hostility. At no time did I witness any ballot cast for Joe Biden be placed in the pile for Donald Trump. So it was one-sided, folks. Another affiant in the mail-in ballot and absentee ballot recounting process testified in her sworn affidavit that on November 16th, 2020, it was also of particular interest to me to see that signatures were not being verified and there were no corresponding envelopes seen in sight. That's Exhibit 10. That's more evidence, sworn affidavits. Yet another affiant in the recount process testified that he received pushback and a lack of any cooperation and was even threatened as if he did something wrong when he pointed out the failure to follow the rules with the observers while open mail-in ballot recounting was occurring, stating, quote, "However, as an observer, I observed that the precinct had 12 counting tables, but only one monitor from the Republican Party. I brought it up to Erica Johnston since the recount rules provided for one monitor from each party per 10 tables." That's more evidence, folks. Right here, Exhibit 16, Ibrahim Reyes. So why is the left getting such an advantage? Somebody had to order it. Election official fraud. Let's keep going. Another affiant explains a pattern of behavior that's alarming in his position as an observer in the recount on absentee ballots with barcodes. And remember, guys, these are observers. It's their job to report this. We can't discount these people. These people have been screened. They've been tested. These are the people that are supposed to check for fraud. So why wouldn't we take them seriously? He testified this, folks. I witnessed two poll workers placing already separated paper machines receipt ballots with barcodes in the Trump tray, placing them in the Biden tray. He's saying that he witnessed this happening. This is another observer saying that he saw Trump votes going in the Biden vote tray. He also witnessed the same two poll workers putting the already separated paper receipt ballots in the no vote and Jorgensen tray and removing them and putting them inside the Biden tray. He's taking the no votes out. He's taking the Jorgensen votes out. Everything's going to Biden. No matter how, whatever, which way they had to steal this election, all the votes had to go to Biden to beat Trump's overwhelming landslide of a lead. They then took out all of the ballots of the Biden tray. They stacked them on the table and they were writing things on the ballot sheet when just staring at the Biden tray that was full of mixed stuff. That's Exhibit 17. Another affiant, a Democrat, testified in his sworn affidavit that before he was forced to move back to where he could not see, he had in fact seen absentee ballots for Trump inserted again into Biden's stack as counted as Biden votes. And this occurred multiple times. That's Exhibit 18. They keep telling us there's no evidence. I'm giving you the evidence, okay? Exhibit 18. And another affiant, they testified, and by the way, an affiant is somebody who witnessed something here. They testified about the lack of process and the hostility only towards the Republican Party, which is in a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. And this guy testified that he also observed throughout his 3 days in Atlanta, not once did anyone verify ballots. In fact, there was no authentication process in place. No envelopes were observed or allowed to be observed. I saw hostilities towards Republican observers and never once saw it towards Democrat observers. Both were identified by badges. So they had to have had intent because you could see on their badge. All right. This is the case she's making. You could see on their badge they were Republican or Democrat, and the Democrats were treated like kings and queens, and the Republicans were treated like horse manure. They were treated like servants and peasants and dungeon workers. Folks, this is called bias, which will lead to finding the fraud, which is already being outlined right here by Sidney Powell, the wonderful, wonderful attorney who is releasing hellfire upon the left. Another affiant explained that his ballot was not only processed in accordance with election law. He witnessed people reviewing his ballot to decide where to place it, which violates the privacy of his ballot. And when he tried to report it to the voter fraud line, he never received any contact or cooperation. He stated, "I voted on October 12th, early at the precinct at Linwood Park. Because of irregularities at the polling location, I called the voter fraud line to ask why persons were discussing my ballot and reviewing it to decide where to place it." I mean, think about that, guys. If he clearly voted for Trump, why would they have to discuss anything if it's clearly a Trump or a Biden vote? They shouldn't have to discuss anything. You look at it and you put it in the right place. When I called the state fraud line, I was directed to a worker in the office of the Secretary of State. Obvious fraud, folks. Obvious fraud going on. I don't care that the left says, oh, it's not enough. It's probably not enough to see, to change anything about the election, regardless of whether it is or not. And I know we're going to find out it is, but regardless of whether or not it is, isn't the sanctity of this election important? Isn't your vote supposed to be important? Think about that, patriots. Think about that, friends. If you can't be confident in our system of voting, in our election system, in our process, our constitutional process to decide any election, not just the president of the United States, why should anyone care ever again? Then we just go the way of Venezuela, which seems to be exactly what they want. It's probably much better for the Great Reset to get rid of the United States, and their culture and their theology and the way they think and their way of life, and change it into a much more conformed and toned down version, a much more socialist version, a version that would ease forward the New World Order, Great Reset type crap. I hate to talk like that, but the conspiracies are no longer conspiracies, ladies and gentlemen. They are no longer conspiracies. So look, this goes on and on. There are so many more that I could read you there. But again, if I did, this would be 19 hours and I would lose you. I might already be losing some of you. I might already be keeping more of you, but I really hope this information helps arm you guys. That's the point of this one. It's not to get a bazillion views, though it would be nice to spread this around so people really are armed with what they need to hear, but it's for the information. General Flynn is out there. He just got pardoned. The digital warriors, the digital soldiers are out there supporting the cause. We're doing everything in our power as citizens to try and help get this right. And even after we win the election, we have a long battle ahead of us, killing off this horrible leftist ideology and fighting this great reset. So we are in this for the long haul. So guys, I need to continue forward. And I need to get on to the voting machines, folks. This is what a lot of you want to talk about. This is what a lot of you want to hear about. But we had to get through an important section with all of these voter irregularities, the voter fraud, and really showing the intent of the Secretary of State and the governor to say, F you to the common citizen, to the common folk, the people of Georgia, the people of the United States, and say, we're going to be tyrannical and do whatever we want. That's not going to stand. And it's important that if you're going to prosecute this criminally after all this is said and done, that we show that the governor and the Secretary of State acted intently on defrauding the United States of America's constitutional election process for the purpose of screwing people over, getting Joe Biden elected, and lining their own fat, rhino, crooked pockets. So, the voting machines secrecy software used by voting machines throughout Georgia is crucial. All right, let me take a drink because my throat is hurting. My head is pounding, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. Again, I'm sorry for the sunglasses. I know it might annoy some folks, but I'm getting through this as best I can for you. I want to get this information out to you as quickly as possible. So I don't think a migraine is grounds for me taking the day off, especially on episode 42, the Thanksgiving special, the revealing of the Kraken. I promised you that I would get it to you. And if I'm going to build that trust, that reliability, that relationship, if I'm going to bring you value in your life, then I need to stay true to my word. Rain, sleet, shine, snow, headache, no headache, whatever the case may be, I have to get it to you. So that's what we're going to do. I brought the big one. I hope I don't pee myself in the middle of this. So let's get to reading. This is page 37, folks. And don't worry, this will speed up pretty soon. These violations of federal and state laws impacted the election of November 3rd, 2020, and set the predicate for the evidence of deliberate fraudulent conduct, manipulation, and lack of mistake that follows. The commonality and statewide nature of these legal violations renders certification of the legal vote untenable and warrants immediate impoundment of voting machines and software used throughout Georgia for expert inspection and retrieval of the software. So what she is saying is that because of the intent, because of what happened, because of all of this previous evidence of fraud that was done through these voting machines, not just the mail-in ballots and everything like that, the certification of the vote in the state is BS. It's garbage. It needs to be thrown out. It has to be put on hold. The machines must be seized by the state so that they can be audited and inspected by experts. And when we go through these machines, we're going to find some crazy stuff that can't be done without an order by the court. And I can promise you, I bet you that Dominion is just scrubbing everything they can scrub right now. They are drilling holes through hard drives and praying to whatever, God they believe in for mercy from their crimes, because the long hammer of the law is coming for them. Folks, let's get through this. An affiant who is a network and information cybersecurity expert under sworn testimony, remember we talked about that, explains that after studying the user manual for Dominion Voting Systems democracy software, he learned that the information about scanned ballots can be tracked inside the software system for Dominion. All right. This is something he figured out. Let's read that again. This guy is a network and information cybersecurity expert. All right. Those are the people that basically can hack for a living and do it for the good guys. And under sworn testimony, something that would get him probably charged with treason for lying about right now, after studying the user manual for the Dominion software, he figured out that there's information about the scanned ballots and it can be tracked inside the system for Dominion. So listen to this. When bulk ballot scanning and tabulation begins, the ImageCast Central Workstation operator will load a batch of ballots into the scanner feed tray and then start the scanning procedure within the software menu. The scanner then begins to scan the ballots, which were loaded into the feed tray, while the ImageCast Central software application tabulates the votes in real time. And that was that real-time number we kept seeing on the television or not even the television, but I bet many of you, like me, on election day, we were looking at vote counts and we were watching the numbers go brrr, 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 up and down, up and down, up and down. That's coming from this crap. They do it in real time, and the information about scanned ballots can be tracked inside the ImageCast Central software application, all right? This is going to be important. Affiant further explains that the central operator can remove or discard batches of votes after all the ballots loaded into the scanner's feed trays have been through the scanner. The ImageCast Central operator will remove the ballots from the tray, then have the option to either accept the batch or discard it. All right? There is nothing at all that protects the security and the sanctity of the counts of ballots in real time, which might explain why we're seeing numbers go up and numbers go down and numbers go up and numbers go down. It's not just what happened in the wee hours of the night when all of those votes magically appeared for Joe Biden and magically disappeared for Trump. There are irregularities strewn throughout this system, and the user has the ability to do that, to delete that, to change that, and it's in the user manual itself. The affiant further testifies that the Dominion Smartmatic user manual itself makes clear, obviously you can tell that I studied this all night, huh? It makes clear that the system allows for threshold settings to be set to mark all ballots as problem ballots for discretionary determinations on where the vote goes. You can mark as many ballots as you want as problem ballots and then change where they went. What? Yeah, that's how our elections are done. We'd do better on carbon paper with freaking people counting it by hand across this entire country than anything with these systems. You know, it's terrible. I'm glad we're living in a world where we want everything to be convenient so that we could become the 700-pound people floating around on the spaceship from the movie WALL-E. But I don't believe that is the way to go when we're talking about the legal and constitutional process of electing our president or anyone, any official in this country, anyone. This stuff is crazy, guys. It's absolutely crazy. The affiant further testifies that the Dominion Smartmatic user manual itself makes clear that the system allows for threshold settings to be set to mark the ballots as problem ballots for the discretionary determinations on where the vote goes. I know I said it twice. Just let it sink in. I bet you have a coworker you don't like, right? Think if that Joe Schmo was just at the helm and they got to just move ballots around. Come on. These are people we're talking about. That's why they keep talking about election official fraud and the fraud of people. You know, the machines are set up with the irregularities as features, and it's up to the people. It's up to the people running the show and the people handling the ballots of whether or not they want to use the special cheating tools that they threw in there, guys. All right. During the scanning process, the ImageCast Central software will detect how much of a percent coverage of the oval was filled in by the voter. The Dominion customer determines, this is quotes coming out of the user manual, guys, determines the thresholds. Think about this. The Dominion customer, that is the people that bought the software, that are using the software, they determine the thresholds of which the oval needs to be covered by a mark in order to qualify as a valid vote. If a ballot has a marginal mark, and this is talking about filling in the mark on the sheet, like filling in a Scantron when you used to do tests back in school. If you're in your 30s or 40s, they did them early 40s, I think. If you're later than that, it was obviously not Scantron, but all of you have filled in the bubble on something. So this is talking about whether they take what amount of ink, what type of ink, what kind of pen, what kind of pencil, whatever, and how big the mark, how small the mark has to be for it to be considered valid. So obviously, if you went and scribbled a big old square over the circle, it might be invalid. Or if you only filled half of the bubble, it might be invalid. That's not determined by the software. It's determined by Mr. Kemp, the Secretary of State, and whoever they've delegated that responsibility to, okay? If a ballot has a marginal mark which did not meet the specific thresholds, the ballot's considered a problem ballot and may be set aside into a folder named Not Cast Images, all right? Think about this and remember that. Through creatively tweaking the oval coverage threshold settings, it should be possible to set thresholds in such a way that a non-trivial amount of ballots are marked problem ballots and sent to the Not Cast Images folder. All right. So if you set the threshold just right, a certain amount of ballots will just go into that folder. So what do they do when they sit in that folder? Let's keep reading. It is possible for an administrator of the ImageCast Central Workstation to view all images of scanned ballots which were deemed problem ballots by simply navigating to the standard Windows File Explorer to the folder named Not Cast Images, which holds ballot scans of problem ballots. It is possible, all right? Think about this. It is possible for an administrator of the ImageCast Central Workstation to view and delete any, I'll say it one more time, any individual ballot scans from the Not Cast Image folder simply by using the standard Windows delete and recycle bin. Okay, so they can literally set this in such a way, and I bet they're going to find some horrible stuff when they audit these machines, that if you, here, let's do something here. All right, I'm going to take this little notepad and I'm going to draw this little circle so I can explain this better. If this right here, and I hope you can see it. Let me see if I can get this closer to you. Look at that. All right. That is a circle and it says Trump on top of it. Again, I hope you, there we go. Now you can see it for those watching. I have a bunch of pro lights in here, so it glared off the notepad. You see that circle for Trump? That would have been a vote for Trump. So let's say it's filled in only 3/4 of the way, something like this, right? They could set the threshold. That was all that crap I was reading, okay? They could set the threshold so that if everything is like 3/4 like that, it'll just go into this folder, a random folder on your computer, all right? And then you could go into that folder and you could just delete the votes. Remember how Trump's votes kept disappearing? You remember how they kept saying that, people are deleting batches of votes and nobody can figure out why or where the evidence is? This is where you start looking. It's right here. This is what they're bringing up. This is a solid case so far, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't the child's play that the leftist news organizations are trying to sell to people. This is real crap. This is a real case that's probably going to be used to turn into a horrible criminal case. I mean, we're going to see trials for this and all kinds of things. You remember how long the O.J. Simpson trial went back in the 90s? This is big time gangster stuff, ladies and gentlemen. The affiant further explains the vulnerabilities in the system when the copy of the selected ballots that are approved in the results folder are made to a flash memory card that is connected to a Windows computer, stating it is possible for an administrator of the ImageCast Central Workstation to view and delete any individual ballot scans from the Not Cast Image folder by simply using standard Windows delete and recycle bin. Again, there it is. All right. You can then All right. The upload process is just as simple of copying. You just copy the results folder. All right. Containing the vote tallies to a flash memory card connected to Windows 10 Pro. The copy process uses standard drag and drop. Okay. So look what they do. And, you keep hearing about these in Pennsylvania. You remember this whole thing about the flash cards that they're finding, the USB sticks. And then in Georgia, when they did the fake recount, they found thousands of ballots for Trump, thousands of ballots on those USB sticks that weren't uploaded. This is what they're talking about. So what they do, all right, you remember I showed you this, right? The oval that's not all the way filled, they fill that in a certain way, okay? And then they get kicked out to this not cast images folder for being possibly invalid ballots. And then the admin goes in and deletes those votes before uploading to the USB stick. So what we're going to find is that the Trump ballots were deleted, all of those deleted votes, and then all of the ballots, Trump and Biden's ballots, were put onto the USB sticks so they would not find any evidence. So the key is going to be in auditing a lot of these machines. All right. So it was announced on Monday, July 29th, 2019, that Governor Kemp awarded a contract for 30,000 new voting machines to Dominion Systems. All right. Think about that across the state of Georgia. Just in Georgia, 30,000. I want you to think about if this happens at one computer, if one person defrauds the system on one computer. Imagine if just 2,000 people did. That wouldn't be that big. Even if 1,000 people did it out of 30,000. Okay. That's not terrible. And let's say they're dealing with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,000 ballots. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of ballots just from a small amount, just even 100 machines here. Let's say 100 machines. All right. Think about this math. Let's say 100 machines were used to delete Trump's votes in Georgia. All right. Out of 30,000. And let's say each of those machines deleted 1,000 votes. All right. What is that? Do the math. All right. What, 1,000? I can do the math. 1,000 times 10 is 10,000. So 1,000 times 100. We're doing the counting on the fingers math here. 1,000 times 100. We're talking 100,000. That is more than enough votes, not just to overturn Georgia, but to landslide Trump in Georgia. This is no joke. The math is the key to finding the answer in all of this, guys. The math is the key. So 30,000 new voting machines to Dominion Voting Systems, scrapping the state's 17-year-old electronic voting equipment and replacing it with touchscreens that print out paper ballots. All right. Critics are quoted, led by Abrams. Democrats fought the legislation and pointed to cybersecurity experts who warned it would leave Georgia's election susceptible to hacking and tampering. And just this week, the Fair Fight voting rights group, started by Stacey Abrams, launched a television ad critical of the bill in a statement Tuesday. The group called it corruption at its worst and a waste of money on hackable voting machines. The Democrats fought this at first, folks, until they figured out it would benefit them. It was further reported in 2019 that the new Dominion voting machines in Georgia, with Georgia's current voting system, there's no way to guarantee that the electronic ballots accurately reflect the choices of voters because there's no paper backup to verify the results. All right? There's none. So this is what they're stating in 2019 about Dominion. It is stated recounts are meaningless, all right, on the direct recording electronic voting machine because they do not reproduce the same numbers they originally generated. Paper ballots alone won't protect the sanctity of elections on new touchscreens called ballot marking devices. The new election system depends on voters to verify the printed text. Sorry, my neck is killing me, guys. I got that migraine just pounding. The new election systems depends The new election system depends on voters to verify the printed text of their choices on their ballots, a step that many voters might not take. The state election board hasn't yet created regulations for how recounts and audits will be conducted, and paper ballots embed selections in barcodes that are only readable by scanning machines, leaving Georgians uncertain whether the barcodes match the votes, guys. All right, guys, 2 seconds here. My head is killing me. Woof. All right. So let's get into how Dominion in general, all right, how they have massive end user vulnerabilities, what the whole scheme was, how this thing worked out here. Look, Dominion Smartmatic systems, this starts on page 44, have massive end user vulnerabilities, okay? Users on the ground, and this is what we were talking about the administrators, the people running these systems in the counting booths. Users on the ground have full admin privileges to machines and software, having been created to rig elections. The Dominion system is designed to facilitate vulnerability and allow a select few to determine which votes will be counted in any election. Workers were responsible for moving ballot data from polling place to the collector's office and inputting it into the correct folder. Any anomaly, such as pen drips or bleeds, results in a ballot being rejected. It is then handed over to a poll worker to analyze and decide if it should count. This creates massive opportunities for purely discretionary and improper vote adjustments. All right. This is where some of the fraud is. Affiant witness, name redacted for security reasons, in his sworn testimony. All right, again, treasonous level prosecution could take place. Treason level of jail for life, execution even, if this is a lie and it's meant to tamper with the U.S. elections. So take this very seriously when people do sworn affidavits. This affiant witness in his sworn testimony explains he was selected for the National Security Guard detail of the president of Venezuela, and that he witnessed the creation of Smartmatic for the purpose of election vote manipulation to ensure Venezuelan dictator Hugo Chavez never lost an election, and he saw it work. Quote, the purpose of this conspiracy was to create and operate a voting system that could change the votes in elections from votes against persons running the Venezuelan government to votes in their favor in order to maintain control of the government. So don't you see? This is a coup. The Democrats are trying to enact a coup on the U.S. government. It's not Trump. They always project what their intentions are. So they say Trump is trying to make a coup happen. They're saying Trump is enacting a coup. You need to take a look at the Democrats, because everything they say we're doing, they're doing. And it's been proven time and time again over the last 4 years, and especially right now, ladies and gentlemen. So I want to move forward. We're about halfway through. Now, not necessarily halfway through the podcast, but we've already gone almost an hour and a half. Woof. And I promise you it would have been much more exciting if I didn't have a freaking migraine from hell. And I'm so sorry that I have to report it this way. But, you know, I told you I'd get you the information, and I'm not going to delay it just because I'm not feeling good. So this is page 56. All right, we're going to move forward now from Dominion. And I mean, this stuff's going to be brought up anyway. It's all going to tie together at the end. But we're going to move on to page 44, which shows, or not page 44, sorry. Oh, I'm having issues here again. Let me fix this. Sorry about that, guys. I don't have a producer. It's just me. So I'm running the mouse here. For those watching, you can see it. And so when I click the wrong thing, it screws up the screen a little bit. But we are back. Page 56, additional specific fraud. On November 4th, 2020, the Georgia GOP chairman issued the following statement. This is the chairman of the GOP in Georgia. Let me repeat. Fulton County election officials told the media and our observers that they were shutting down the tabulation center at State Farm Arena at 10:30 a.m. on election night to continue counting ballots in secret till 1 a.m. That's 2.5 hours of secret ballot counting. With everything you just heard about Dominion, I wonder what the administrators of the system could have done or deleted between 10:30 and 1 a.m. So, it was widely reported that as of 7 p.m. on Wednesday, Fulton County elections officials said 30,000 absentee ballots were not processed due to a pipe burst. Officials reassured voters that none of the ballots were damaged. The water was quickly cleaned up, but the emergency delayed officials from processing ballots between 5:30 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. And officials then say they continued to count beginning at 8:30 a.m. Wednesday. The statement from Fulton County continues. Tonight, and you guys remember this on election night, tonight, Fulton County will report results for approximately 86,000 absentee ballots, as well as Election Day and early voting results. These represent the vast majority of ballots cast within Fulton County. As planned, Fulton County will continue to tabulate the remainder of absentee ballots over the next 2 days. Absentee ballot processing requires that each ballot is open, signatures verified. They just implicated themselves. Signatures verified and ballots scanned. This is a labor-intensive process that takes longer to tabulate than other forms of voting. Fulton County did not anticipate having all absentee ballots processed on Election Day. Officials said they will work to ensure every vote is counted and all laws and regulations are followed. And I, again, can bet that as a lawyer, that's going to be one thing they try to stick them on. They told everybody signatures were verified, at least in Fulton County. So why weren't signatures verified? It's all going to come out, folks. And this goes on and on. Plaintiffs have learned that the representation about a water leak affecting the room where absentee ballots were counted was not true. The only water leak that needed repairs at State Farm Arena from November 3rd to November 5th was a toilet overflow that occurred early on November 3rd, and it had nothing to do with a room with ballot counting, but the false water break representation led to everyone being sent home. Nonetheless, the first 6 people, then 3 people stayed until 1:05 a.m. working the computers. I don't think they were playing solitaire or space cadet pinball, ladies and gentlemen. No, I think they were working the Dominion software, and this is going to prove it. It's going to come out. They just have to do some discovery, if you know what I mean. An affiant recounts how she was present at State Farm Arena on November 3rd and saw election workers remaining behind after people were told to leave. That is evidence. Exhibit 29. Plaintiffs have also learned through several reports that in 2010, Eric Coomer joined Dominion as vice president of U.S. Engineering. And according to his biography, Coomer graduated from UC Berkeley. That's a very liberal place, with a PhD in nuclear physics. I wonder what damage he could do. Eric Coomer was later promoted to Voting Systems Officer of Strategy and Security. And although Coomer has since been removed from the Dominion page of directors, interesting, Dominion altered its website after Colorado resident Joel Altman disclosed that as a reporter, he infiltrated Antifa, a domestic terrorist organization, where he recorded Eric Coomer saying, and this is on record. We have recordings of this, ladies and gentlemen. This is evidence. All right. This is the Dominion voting systems. All right. Officer of Strategy and Security, who, when this all came out, was magically disappeared from the director page, though it doesn't mean he magically disappeared. But this is recorded. This is evidence. This is hard evidence, and people have seen it. He said, don't worry, Trump won't win this election. We fixed that. That's enough to put a mafia boss away, in my opinion, as well as social media posts with violence threatened against President Trump, okay? This is more evidence, and they have entered the evidence, which is why they can use it here as a sourced piece of information. All right, guys? Multiple expert reports and statistical analysis prove hundreds of thousands of votes were lost or shifted that cost President Trump and the Republican candidates of the congressional districts 6 and 7 their races. Okay, this is page 59, which starts here on this new one. So We just told you about the water pipe burst, and we just told you about Mr. Coomer, the one who admitted, who was the security, high-ranking security guy at Dominion. He admitted on tape, all right, to Antifa, some of the people besides the BLM folks that are burning down our towns and businesses in the blue areas, at least. The reason why people are going to prison for defending themselves, Antifa. The people that want to tear down our government and make us all communists. Antifa. The anti-fascists who fight fascism with fascism. Antifa. Ladies and gentlemen, as evidenced by numerous public reports, experts' reports, and witness statements, defendants' egregious misconduct has included ignoring legislative mandates. And remember, the legislature chooses how this is done. And when it gets to the Supreme Court and they're ruling on constitutionality, take the what's right, what's wrong, what's up, what's down, what's left, or take that out of this. And let's just look at the Constitution. If the Supreme Court is just ruling on constitutionality, Trump's the next president again. Okay? Folks. Legislative mandates. The Constitution states the legislature makes these decisions. Legislative mandates concerning mail-in and ordinary ballots. All right, so we can stop listening to this chair squeaking, by the way. Let me pull it forward a little bit. I need to get a better chair. I don't make a lot of money. I'm not Joe Rogan. I apologize. All of this is coming out of my pocketbook. I have a regular day job. I use that salary to pay for this business. American Reveille LLC, by the way. If you really want to help out, you can always go to my website, www.americanreveille.com. I incorporated this into a company. I'm trying to grow it into a large media company that can provide livelihoods and jobs for people and help our cause on the right. But since we don't have a profit, we're not selling anything. I'm just giving you this information. If you really, really, really want to help out, www.americanreveille.com. Click on the tab that says donate, and whatever you can give, it will all be reinvested into what we do. And I will provide you with information about how we use that money. So you won't have any worry that it's going into my pocket and paying for steak dinners, because I promise you it is not. It will go to upgrading camera equipment, helping people that work with us to get us information, writers, whatever we have to do with that money to get the best stories and get the best people and get the best equipment and upgrade our operations so that we can start rolling with the big boys and girls we will use that money for. So let's get back to it. All right. We talked about the legislative mandates. All right. Concerning mail-in and ordinary ballots, let's keep reading, that led to the disenfranchisement of an enormous number of Georgia voters. Plaintiffs' experts can show that consistent with the above specific misrepresentations, analysis of the voting data reveals the following. All right. This is going to be the statistical evidence that they use in the case. We've seen all kinds of internet ninjas out there, digital warriors, good information, bad information. We've seen the whole mix of statistical stuff on YouTube, on Rumble, all over the internet showing the discrepancies, but the real ones are deciphered and they're in this suit. So, regarding uncounted mail ballots based on evidence gathered by Matt Brainerd in the form of recorded calls and declarations of voters and analyzed by plaintiff's expert William M. Briggs, PhD, and take it from experience, getting your PhD is not easy, shows based on a statistically significant sample that the total number of mail-in ballots that voters mailed in but were never counted have a 95% likelihood of falling between 31,559 and 38,886 total lost votes. This range exceeds the margin of loss President Trump had of 12,670 by at least 18,889 votes, and by as many as 26,196 lost votes. This is a different part of the case, which means the exhibits start over. This is evidence. Exhibit 1, Dr. Briggs' report. There's more evidence. Plaintiff's expert also finds that the voter received tens of thousands of ballots that they never requested. Now, this is a big one they aren't talking too much about in the media yet, and you need to understand and should be really specifically mentioned to you, okay? Plaintiffs' experts also find that voters received tens of thousands of ballots that they never requested, all right? Specifically, Dr. Briggs found that in the state of Georgia, based on a statistically significant sample, the expected amount of persons that received an absentee ballot that they did not request ranges from 16,938 people to 22,771, which exceeds the margin of loss for President Trump by 12,670 votes and by at least 4,268 unlawful requests, and by as many as 10,101 unlawful requests. This widespread pattern, and really quick, this is crazy. This means that people are getting all kinds of ballots that never wanted those ballots or had already voted. I mean, this is nuts. The widespread pattern, as reflected within the population of unreturned ballots analyzed by Dr. Briggs, reveals the unavoidable reality that in addition to the calculations herein, third parties voted an untold number of unlawfully acquired absentee or mail-in ballots which should not be in the database of unreturned ballots analyzed. These unlawfully voted ballots prohibited properly registered persons from voting and reveal a pattern of widespread fraud down the ballot. All right? This is voter disenfranchisement. This is taking the votes away from Trump supporters and giving a unconstitutional and unfair, unethical advantage, an immoral advantage to Biden and his supporters. Further, as calculated by Matt Brainerd, there exists clear evidence of 20,311 absentee or early voters in Georgia that voted while registered as having moved out of the state. All right, guys? This is a big deal, all right? This is a huge, huge deal. Look at this. Applying pro rata, the above calculations, all right, separately to Cobb County based on a number of unreturned ballots, a range of 1,255 and 1,687 ballots were ordered by third parties, and a range of 2,338 and 2,897 lost mail ballots, plus 10,684 voters documented in the NCOA as having moved. For a combination, here's the big number, all right, guys? A combination minimum of 14,276 missing and unlawful ballots and a maximum of 15,250 missing and unlawful ballots, which exceeds the statewide presidential race total margin by a range of as few as 1,606 ballots and as many as 2,580 in the county of Cobb alone. That's one county, guys. One county just changed the election. So think about what happens when they look at all of the counties, guys. As seen from the expert analysis of Eric Quinnell, mathematical anomalies further support these findings when in various districts within Fulton County, such as vote gains that exceed reasonable expectations when compared to 2016 and a failure of gains to be normally distributed, but instead shifting substantially towards the tail of the distribution in what is known as a platykurtic distribution. I'm not that good in statistics, but I understand how distribution works. And they're talking about normal bell curves and left and right skews. And what you're seeing here is an anomaly, and it's known as a platykurtic distribution. Dr. Quinnell identifies numerous anomalies, such as votes to Biden in excess of 2016 that exceed the registrations that are in excess of 2016. It's mathematical impossibilities. Ultimately, he identifies the counties in order of their excess performed over what would have fit in the normal distribution of gains, revealing a list of the most anomalous counties down to the least. These various anomalies provide evidence of voting irregularities. That's exhibit 27. That's more evidence. And it's going to show the worst counties to the best counties in order of anomalies, done with actual statistics, actual math, PhD level stuff here. And guys, it's damning for the left. In sum, with the expert analysis of William M. Briggs, Ph.D., based on recorded calls and declarations, the extent of missing and unlawfully requested ballots create substantial evidence that the mail ballot system has fundamentally failed to provide a fair voting mechanism. In short, tens of thousands of votes did not count, while the pattern of fraud makes clear that tens of thousands of votes were also improperly counted. This margin of victory in election to Mr. Biden was only 12,670 and cannot withstand most of these criticisms individually, and certainly not in aggregate, not together, not as one giant atom bomb, which is coming his way. Guys, this is crazy statistical evidence. All right. And it keeps on going. They have mountains of it. All right. Mountains of statistical evidence. And you can read through it. All right. The statistical evidence that we've been going through, guys, it starts here on page 59 if you want to get a real in-depth view. But I promised you an overview, and even an overview has been taking hours. We're already almost at the 2-hour mark. We're getting there. So the next thing we're going to go through is the Secretary of State and Georgia counties. So they violated the 14th Amendment through the denial of equal protection. And let's talk about the 14th Amendment for just 2 seconds here. All right, guys. Look, this is coming from Cornell, all right, .edu. This is an actual website here from Cornell. And it's talking about the 14th Amendment, and we're just going to look at Section 1. This is a Reconstruction Amendment. It happened after the Civil War. The Section 2, 3, and 4 talk about elected officials and insurrection and how we deal with insurrection and rebellion, which, in my opinion, the left kind of walking the thin line on that right about now. But look, all persons born or naturalized in the United States, this is the 14th Amendment, Section 1, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of the citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any persons of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. And this is what they're violating. This is what Cuomo violates, de Blasio violates, Governor Newsom, Gretchen, I keep thinking Gretchen Wilson, like the redneck woman country singer person, but Gretchen, you know her last name. I can't believe it's slipping my head right now. That's not the point. But all of these Democrat leaders, they are obstructing your life, liberty, your property, the process of law. They're obstructing and abridging the privileges or immunities of the United States citizen. They are making laws and changing rules that screw over the people. And it's covered in the 14th Amendment, Section 1, folks. And that's where they are all going to go down in flames eventually, in utter burning napalm-like flames. So let's keep going here. Secretary of State and Georgia counties violated the 14th Amendment by denying the equal protection of its citizens. This starts here on page 70. We are almost to the end. Bear with me, almost 2 hours in. Whew, we're going to get through this, and my head is a-pounding. So I can't wait to get done myself, start uploading this beast, because it's going to take forever, and get some Tylenol into this noggin of mine. Well, into this mouth, down to my stomach, digest it through the system, and hopefully into this noggin so that I can conduct myself during Thanksgiving without wearing sunglasses and staring at the floor in tears. Folks, the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution provides, quote, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protections of the law. We talked about that. I just read to you the section. We talked and explained it a little bit. That's a little bit vague, but it is going into the definition that I gave you. And obviously, it's a 106-page document. It will be explained in court to a judge. All right. Once granted the right to vote on equal terms, the state may not, by later arbitrarily or disparate treatment, value one person's vote over the value of another's. That was decided Harper v. Virginia Board of Elections. Once the franchise is granted to the electorate, lines may not be drawn which are inconsistent with the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The court has held to ensure equal protection. A problem inheres in the absence of specific standards to ensure its equal application. The formulation of uniform rules to determine intent based on these reoccurring circumstances is practicable and we conclude necessary, which was done in Bush v. Gore and will be used as a precedent when this gets to the Supreme Court. The equal enforcement of election laws is necessary to preserve our most basic and fundamental rights. The requirement of equal protection is particularly stringently enforced as to laws that affect the exercise of fundamental rights, including the right to vote. All right, guys? And the left is intent in tearing down our democracy, or not our democracy, it's a republic, excuse me, but tearing down our foundation through our Constitution. That's what I meant to say. They're intent on tearing down capitalism, our way of life, tearing down the Constitution, and putting in their own socialist system that doesn't include these protections so they can never lose again. All right, guys, we're not going to let that happen. In statewide and federal elections conducted in the state of Georgia, including without limitation on November 3rd, 2020 general election, all candidates, political parties, and voters, including without limitation plaintiffs, have a vested interest in being present and having meaningful access to observe and monitor the electoral process in each county to ensure that it is properly administered in every election district and otherwise free, fair, and transparent. Folks, that wasn't allowed. They talk about what we talked about before with people not being able to watch, the unfair stuff that the well, let me just look for a second. Moreover, through its provisions involving watchers and representatives, the Georgia Election Code ensures that all candidates and political parties in each county, including the Trump campaign, have meaningful access to observe and monitor the electoral process to ensure it is properly administered. So this is in there. It's in plain terms. She says it in plain terms. The statute clearly prohibits opening absentee ballots prior to Election Day, while the rule authorizes doing so 3 weeks before Election Day. There's no reconciling this conflict. The state election board has authority to adopt lawful and legal rules and regulations, but no authority, only the legislature, no authority to promulgate a regulation that is directly contrary to an unambiguous statute. All right. Therefore, it is plainly and indisputably unlawful. And if you're not putting your emotions into this as a lefty, it is unlawful. You can tell how it completely goes against. They're just trying to use COVID-19 as an excuse to break the law. They're hiding it under the guise of protecting people. But truthfully, they're just using it to break the law, ladies and gentlemen. It's a 14th Amendment issue. Let's move forward. There's another one, all right? The 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause, denial of due process because of the disparate treatment of absentee and mail-in voters among different counties, all right? So these that we're going through right now, these different counts, they're going to explain the different things that we're charging them with, that we're saying they did. The plaintiffs incorporate each of the prior allegations in this complaint. Voting is a fundamental right protected by the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The 14th Amendment protects the right to vote from conduct by state officials which seriously undermines the fundamental fairness of the electoral process. Marks v. Stinson, all right, that was the case where that was decided. All right. Having once granted the right to vote on equal terms, the state may not, by later arbitrary and disparate treatment, value one person's vote over another. All right. Folks, the evidence in this case is overwhelming. She keeps saying release the Kraken. All right. And we may look at this when we hear about it and get the little highlights like it's just the same stuff we've been hearing. But you have to understand that this is a case full of so much damning evidence that when it's decided, you're going to see an explosion, the likes of which you've never seen. This is going to impact everything. It is gigantic, absolutely gigantic. All right. Defendants are not part of the General Assembly and cannot exercise legislative power. Rather, defendants' power is limited to executing the laws that are passed by the legislature. What they're saying is the governor, the state board of anything, the secretary of state, nobody has the right to change any of these rules except the legislature. All right. The Georgia General Assembly may enact laws governing the conduct of elections, but that did not happen. What happened were changes to the rules in the middle of the night, the election, before the election. During this whole process, they just kept changing the rules. All right. Let's see. Let me go a little bit. Federal courts possess broad discretion to fashion an equitable remedy. All right. The decision whether to grant equitable relief, and if granted, what form it takes, though, lies in the discretion of the district court. Moreover, to the extent that a voter is at risk for having his or her ballot rejected due to minor errors made in contravention of these requirements, the decision to provide a notice and opportunity to cure the procedure to alleviate that risk is one best suited for the legislature. All right, guys, and we know what was happening in Pennsylvania, where they were calling certain people to cure ballots in Democrat counties, but not calling people that were Republican. Not at all. All right. This is best left. All of these things have to be left to the legislature. All right. That's the senators, the congressmen, all of those people, the people that are elected. All right, to do that work, not the governor, not the secretary of state, no board of electors, nobody like that has that power besides the legislature. The disparate treatment of Georgia voters in subjecting one class of voters to greater burdens or scrutiny than another violates the equal protection guarantees, because the right of suffrages can be denied by a debasement or dilution of the weight of a citizen's vote just as effectively as by wholly prohibiting the free exercise of the franchise. That's another case, Reynolds, all right? Rice versus McAllister, Heitman versus Brown. There is so much substantial evidence that also, not even evidence, but precedent that shows how a judge has to rule in this case. And it's not looking good for the bad guys, folks. It is not looking good. The defendants, the governor, the Secretary of State, they are not the legislature, and their unilateral decision to create and implement a cure procedure for some but not all absentee mail-in voters in this state violates the Due Process Clause of the United States Constitution. That means that the same thing that was happening in Pennsylvania, the same thing was also happening in Georgia. I wonder who coordinated all of this. The best guess is yours, but I'm betting they are a deep state player. They are a deep state player. Let me take a sip of this, because I'm sure you can hear it in my voice. I'm starting to make some mistakes and my voice is getting a little scratchy because we are pretty much at 2 hours into this shindig. Whew. And for those who have hanged with me this long, I really hope you're getting the good information you were looking for and what you needed. It took hours to really read this, 7, 8 hours to dig through it, to put in my notes, to do everything that I needed to do. So getting it to you in hopefully under 3 hours is a big feat. And so by condensing it to that, I'm still hoping I give you that service. I create that value for you. I make you feel good about what you're hearing, about what's going to happen, about the upcoming and impending tidal wave that's coming for the left, and really get you the meat and potatoes of what's happening in here. I know we're going a lot deeper than most other people will go, but trust me, we could go deep, and we could do this and talk about this for 8, 9, 10 hours, even deciphering and really getting into all these little laws and statutes that you're seeing. This could be a 15-hour podcast-a-thon, and I think my head would explode. So I'm doing the best to get you a little detail, maybe a little more detail in other places than you need it, but I hope that putting this together really gets you the information you need to arm yourself with the truth, ladies and gentlemen. This is another one, the 14th Amendment, another count here. Denial of due process on the right to vote, all right? The right of qualified citizens to vote in a state election involving federal candidates is recognized as a fundamental right under the 14th Amendment of the United States, okay? And we're going to come down a little. Indeed, ever since the slaughterhouse cases, the United States, and those are different cases that happened that you can look up in 1873, The United States Supreme Court has held that the Privileges or Immunities Clause of the 14th Amendment protects certain rights of federal citizenship from state interference, including the rights of citizens to directly elect members of Congress. And that's a case Twining versus New Jersey from 1908. Another one, Ex parte Yarbrough, that's 1884. This is Oregon versus Mitchell, 1970. There are so many cases, all right? Obviously included within the right to vote secured by the Constitution is the right of qualified voters within a state to cast their ballots and have them counted, which is not what happened. Guys, every voter in a federal election, whether he votes for a candidate with little chance of winning or for one with little chance of losing, has a right under the Constitution to have his vote fairly counted without its being distorted by fraudulently cast votes. That's Anderson versus the U.S. That's 1974. Baker versus Carr, 1962. These are things that are going to take precedent that the judges are going to review and have to make decisions on. The right to an honest count. That did not happen. We have evidence of widespread dishonest counting, practices that promote the casting of illegal or unreliable ballots. You mean the entire mail-in system? In Georgia, the signature verification requirement is a dead letter, all right? The signature rejection rate for the most recent election announced by the Secretary of State was 0.15. The signature rejection rate for absentee ballots was 0.00167, only 30 statewide. Hancock County, Georgia, population 8,348, rejected 9 ballots, all right, for signature mismatch. Fulton County rejected 8. No other metropolitan city in Georgia rejected even a single absentee ballot application for signature mismatch. The state of Colorado, which has run voting by mail for years, has a signature rejection rate of 0.52 and 0.66. The state of Oregon had a rejection rate of 0.86. In 2016 alone, the state of Washington, where I live, has a rate between 1% and 2%. These are high numbers when we're talking about hundreds of thousands of votes. So if Georgia rejected absentee ballots at a rate of, rejected absentee ballots at a rate of 0.52 instead of the actual 0.15, approximately 4,600 more absentee votes would be rejected. All right. What they're saying is signature validation did not happen. It barely happened. In key counties, it didn't happen at all. And it is a disgrace. And finally, we're going to move on to one of the big tamales that I wanted to talk about. Count 5, the widespread ballot fraud. And we're almost at the wrap up of this. I think we'll get through this at about 2.5 hours. So that will give you guys a good amount of information to digest, and it'll give me a good amount of time to eat a bunch of Hall's lozenges after this so I don't lose my voice and have to get throat surgery at some point. But I really, really, really hope you appreciate what we've done here, and I hope it helps. I hope it brings clarity to people. I hope you can use this to show people on the left the facts, and I hope that people on the right that are confused about this case because it's so long and in such jargon and legal jumble, I hope this brings some clarity and some insight to you, and you feel much better about what's going on so we can let go of some of the stress, some of this inner turmoil about what we hope, will happen, but what we might doubt. But I'm telling you, guys, these are clear-cut cases. So unless the Supreme Court itself is corrupt, folks, President Trump is staring in the face of re-election, and we are staring in the face of huge conflict when the left loses their absolute minds. But thank God we'll have President Trump to use the Insurrection Act if possible, which I think that's what he's honestly been saving it for. But anyway, count 5, widespread ballot fraud. Let me take another sip of my drink here. It's amino acids. It's a half gallon of water here with amino acids and some sugar-free watermelon Kool-Aid flavoring. If there's a Republican or right-wing supplement company out there that wants to peddle some amino acids, give me a call. Anyway, count 5. There was widespread ballot fraud. Here's some big tamale stuff, folks. Plaintiffs refer to and incorporate by reference each of the prior paragraphs of this complaint as though the same were repeated at length herein. What it's saying is take everything into consideration you just heard for the last 2 hours and stick it right here, because it all applies to this, all right? Plaintiffs they contest the results of Georgia's election with standing conferred under these laws. Therefore, pursuant to more laws, the misconduct, fraud, or irregularity by any primary or election official or officials sufficient to change or place in doubt the result, the foundational principle that Georgia law, quote, nonetheless allows elections to be contested through litigation, both as a check to the integrity of the election process and as a means of ensuring the fundamental right of citizens to vote and to have their votes counted accurately. That's from the case Martin v. Fulton County Board of Registration in 2019. All right. End elections, registration elections. So what this is saying and what we're getting into finally, folks, is the case altogether. We're going to bring this together in the last section and tell you what this is all about. But right here, they're saying that we have mass voter fraud. The previous serves as evidence. And these cases that they're presenting right here show that the people of Georgia have a legal right to this fair election, to have everything checked, and to legally halt the certification if we can't validate the authenticity of a fair and free election. And we can't, because it wasn't free and fair. All right, guys, the Georgia Supreme Court has made clear that the plaintiffs need not show how the voters would have voted if their absentee ballots had been regular, only had to show that there were enough irregular ballots to place in doubt the result. That is law in Georgia. So when you hear the left screaming that it's not enough, we don't know, it doesn't matter. All right, that we show or not show. Half the information that shows that the ballots were regular, they don't matter technically to this law right here. But we have overwhelming evidence, so we need to stick it all in there. It's a monster of evidence, a Kraken of evidence. All right, guys. So we didn't even need half of that. But the other half of the evidence show that there's plenty of doubt. The entirety of the evidence show that the entire election is in doubt and it needs to be thrown out. The Supreme Court invalidated an election in Meade v. Sheffield and ordered a new election because it found, all right, that thus it was not incumbent upon the plaintiff to show how the voters would have voted if their absentee ballots had been regular. He had only to show that there were enough irregular ballots to place doubt in the result. He succeeded in that task. All right. There's Howl and Fears. There's so many cases, folks. The glitches, then, we move on. The glitches in the Dominion system that seem to have the uniform effect of hurting Trump and helping Biden have been widely reported in the press and confirmed by the analysis of independent experts. Prima facie evidence in multiple affidavits shows the specific fraudulent acts which directly resulted in the flipping of the race at issue. Votes being switched in Biden's favor. Put that out. Votes being switched in Biden's favor away from Trump. Look at this. The left. See this? Threat detected. Bitdefender has blocked multiple threats on your device. See, I have so much antivirus, protections on here. I use a VLAN, a virtual network, all of that stuff, because I get attacked all the time by angry leftists who are trying to hack my system and shut me down. It's not just the censorship I have to deal with. It's not just the threats I get through messages and all that. I also have to deal with these leftist hackers trying to get into my program. It happens all the time. Where it says multiple threats, I bet when I go in there, it's like 37 attacks. This happens to me at least twice a week, and it's nuts. But I got the best stuff here. That's where I've been putting the money in to protect my family and protect myself so that we could hopefully get through this while still giving you the best information possible. So let's get back to the task at hand. This is what the evidence shows. The votes were switched in Biden's favor away from Trump. The lack of procedures in place to follow the election code and the purchase and use of Dominion voting systems, despite massive evidence of serious vulnerability. A demonstration that misrepresentations were made about a pipe burst that sent everyone home, while the first 6, then 3 unknown individuals were left alone in the morning hours working on the machines by themselves. Those machines that we know can be hacked and 7 minutes with a small screwdriver. Further, a failure to demonstrate compliance with the Georgia Election Board codes and maintaining logs on the voting system for a genuine and sound audit, other than voluntary editable logs that prevent genuine audits. While the bedrock of this democratic republic rests on citizens' confidence in the validity of our elections and a transparent process, Georgia's November 3rd, 2020 general election remains under a pall of corruption and irregularity that reflects a pattern of absence of mistake. At best, the evidence so far shows ignorance of the truth. At worst, it proves knowing intent to defraud, which is treason at the highest level when this becomes criminal. All right. This is a case that's going up to change the election. Eventually, if the right people do something about it, this will become a criminal case, probably first against Brian Kemp and the secretary, and then going deep and deeper and deeper into the state of players that were corrupt and using this to their advantage. Plaintiffs' experts also find that voters received tens of thousands of ballots they never requested. Then they talk about the Dr. Briggs evidence that we talked about earlier, the statistical evidence we went over, where they found that in the state of Georgia, based on the significant sample, the expected amount of persons that received absentee ballots that did not request them, it ranged from 16,938 to 22,771, which exceeds the president's loss by 12,670 votes. I mean, this is a whole plethora. It's a widespread pattern, ladies and gentlemen. Further, there exists clear evidence of 20,311 absentee voters that voted while registered as having moved out of the state. We're talking about all the stuff we went through earlier. The very existence of absentee mail-in ballots created a heightened opportunity for fraud. The population of unreturned ballots was analyzed by William Briggs, PhD. It revealed the probability, like we talked about, that a far greater number of mail-in ballots were requested by third parties or sent erroneously to persons and voted fraudulently, undetected by a failed system of signature verification. And we proved through statistical analysis that signature verification barely happened or didn't happen in many, many places throughout Georgia and even other states in other cases. Remember, there's multiple lawsuits, and we're just looking at Sidney Powell's, all right? We considered the harm of uncounted votes. The right to vote, which is the 14th Amendment, was infringed upon, guys. The plaintiffs, they have no adequate remedy at law. As seen from the expert analysis of William Higgs, PhD, based on actual voter data, tens of thousands of votes did not count. And tens of thousands of votes were unlawfully requested, which is disenfranchisement of voters, which is against the 14th Amendment. See, the 14th Amendment due process clause protects the rights to vote from conduct by state officials which seriously undermines the fundamental fairness of the electoral process. That's Marks versus Stinson. I mean, there are so many cases, and we're just going through all the stuff that I really got in depth with. I should have done this one earlier so I could have briefly overviewed it with you and then went through each section individually, but I'm not perfect. There are people that'll probably come up with better ones than I did, but they'll get it out in a day or two or three because they really went down and structured their episodes better. I just wanted to get you the information and use my skills and my knowledge to translate it as best I could into our blue-collar layman terms so that we could understand it, we could wrap our head around the data, and we could use it to protect ourselves and use it as a weapon of truth against the left, all right? So separate from the Equal Protection Clause, the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause protects the right to vote. We talked about that. Part of the court's justification for such rulings in the Supreme Court's recognition that the right to vote and to free and fair elections is one that is preservative of other basic civil and political rights. So it is our right. It is our God-given right to vote, and that's what they're saying. The right to vote, the right to have one's vote counted, and the right to have one's vote given equal weight are basic and fundamental constitutional rights incorporated in the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, ladies and gentlemen. They're not going to be fighting this like little bits and pieces in some civil court. This is going to be a constitutional case that is ruled on by the Supreme Court. It is nuts. It's going to go through the lower courts, of course, and we'll see what happens there. But eventually this might apply to the entire country. This is a crazy big, huge, groundbreaking, famous. It's going to be absolutely famous and historic by the time we're done. We're going to see some crazy stuff between now and December 14th. I can guarantee you that. Moreover, through its provisions involving watchers and representatives, the Georgia Election Code ensures that all candidates and political parties, including without limitation plaintiff, Republicans, and the Trump campaign, shall be present and have meaningful access to observe and monitor the electoral process. We know that didn't happen. The defendants have a duty to guard against deprivation of the rights to vote through the delusion of validity, cast ballots by ballot fraud or election tampering. They have the right to guard against ballot tampering. But rather than heeding those mandates and duties, guys, the defendants arbitrarily and capriciously denied the Trump campaign and Republicans meaningful access to observe and monitor the electoral process. It goes through all the reasons why that we talked about, and that is a violation of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. Consequentially, defendants created a system whereby it was physically impossible for the candidates and political parties to view the ballots and verify that all illegally cast ballots were not open and counted. And this keeps going and going. The relief sought in the elimination of mail ballots from counting in the 2020 election. Alternatively, the president-electors of the state of Georgia should be disqualified from counting towards the 2020 election. They're trying to throw this entire thing out when we consider the harm of these uncounted ballots and ballots not ordered by the voters themselves, and the potential that many of these unordered ballots may in fact have been improperly voted and also prevented proper voting at the polls. The mail ballot system has clearly failed in the state of Georgia and did so on a large scale and widespread basis, guys. This is the U.S. Code 3 U.S.C. 5, and here is what it says. If any state shall have provided by laws enacted prior to the day fixed for the appointment of electors, for its final determination of any controversy or contest concerning the appointment of all or any of the electors of such state, by judicial or other methods or procedures, and such determination shall have been made at least 6 days before the time fixed for the meeting of the electors, such determination made pursuant to such law so existing on said day, and made at least 6 days prior to said time of meeting of the electors, shall be conclusive and shall govern in the counting of the electoral votes as provided in the Constitution and as hereinafter regulated so far as the ascertainment of the electors appointed by such state is concerned. So I'm going to translate that to you, and then we're going to get to the end section in here. We're going to wrap this up. She made a gigantic case against the state of Georgia here, a gigantic case. All right. That proves, to me at least, and should to you after hearing what I said, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Georgia's election certification will be invalid. Okay. And the U.S. Code, the law of the land across the entire nation, states that everything has to be conclusive before certification and before the president can be elected, okay? Before the electors can even be appointed. So without Georgia being conclusive on what actually happened, with all of this evidence of fraud, Georgia, by the law of the land, by the agreement that they made entering into a union with all of these other states, they cannot, by constitutional law, not some silly little local law, not some criminal case law that's happening local downtown, some, lawsuit for $500, actual constitutional law. Georgia can't certify. If they certify, they're breaking that national law, that federal law. Guys, this is open and shut. This is nuts. If they certify, they are certifying fraud. And as Sidney Powell said, they need to be careful with what they certify because they're sealing their fate. They're certifying their own fraud and corruption. The evidence is going to come out. This is just a touching point on it so that we could tell the judge what our requests are, what we want as Republicans, what we see as fair, what we are asking for in the courts in Georgia and eventually across the United States. And this is what Sidney Powell has to say in the request for relief. Let me take a sip of water as we prepare to grind out the last section here. And thank you guys so much for staying with me. I hope I wasn't too dry or boring for this because of the migraine. I hope the sunglasses don't bother you. I hope I've been able to keep this entertaining. And like I said, if you really, really, really enjoy this work, if you really feel like I've helped you gain the knowledge you need to successfully understand what's going on and either convince people on the left or recruit people on the right to know what the hell is happening, to wake people up, to get them ready for this American Reveille, if you feel like this is putting that information into your hands, please, please, please do me a favor. www.americanreveille.com. Go to the donation page, even $1, even 50 cents. I'm not going to be some guy that sits here and asks you for some ungodly stuff. I know anything helps, anything counts, and it's not going to go towards the food on my table. It's not going to go towards the money in my pocket. It's going to go directly into the American Reveille LLC bank account and be used to get more information into your fingertips in the future to upgrade our operation. So let's get to this last section so that I can then go pass out before Thanksgiving dinner. And hopefully this migraine will be gone because, oh my God, I'm staring at this gigantic studio light that's right in front of me. I got all the other lights off, but the studio light is beaming even through the sunglasses. I think if I wasn't wearing the sunglasses, I wouldn't have been able to make it through this. So the request for relief, what do we want? What are we looking for? Accordingly, plaintiffs seek an emergency order instructing defendants to decertify the results of the general election for the office of the president. In the alternative, if they don't want to do that, if the judge thinks that that's not the way to go, we're also asking in the alternative, plaintiffs seek an emergency order prohibiting defendants from including any certified results from the general election, the tabulation of absentee and mailing ballots, which do not comply with the election code, including, without limitation, the tabulation of absentee and mail-in ballots. Trump campaign's watchers were prevented from observing or based on the tabulation of invalidity cast absentee and mail-in ballots which lack a secrecy envelope or contain on the envelope. We'll just call it 1 instead of I. It's going to get confusing to people that are listening and not watching this. 1, lack a secrecy envelope or contain on the envelope any text, mark, or symbol which reveals the elector's identity, political affiliation, or candidate preference. 2, do not include on the outside envelope a completed declaration that is dated and signed by the elector. Or 3, are delivered in person by third parties for non-disabled voters. So they want, if they're not going to just decertify the whole election and just pull Georgia out of it, they want the courts in Georgia to say that all of this stuff that shows that certain ballots should be disqualified need to be disqualified. So if they choose this, they'll disqualify ballots and rule in this way. If that's what they want, then Georgia flips red and goes to Trump. When we consider the harm of these uncounted votes and ballots not ordered by the voters themselves, and the potential that many of these unordered ballots may in fact have been improperly voted and also prevented proper voting at the polls, the mail ballot system has clearly failed in the state of Georgia and did so on large-scale, widespread basis, folks. The size of the voting failures, whether accidental or intentional, are multiples larger than the margin in the state. For these reasons, Georgia cannot reasonably rely on the results of the mail vote. Relief sought in the elimination of mail ballots from counting in the 2020 election. So disqualify the mail-in votes. They're crap. Alternatively, the electors for the state of Georgia should be disqualified from counting towards 2020. Alternatively, the electors of the state of Georgia should be directed to vote for President Donald Trump. These are giving all these different options. We saw things that were happening with the electors, things that were happening where the local certification, they were bullied, they were their kids were doxxed, they were threatened, they had death threats, so they voted for Biden, and then later changed. Remember, they rescinded those votes, but they said, screw it, those rescindants don't count because they've already voted. Even though they were bullied, even though they were harassed, even though their lives were threatened, their kids were doxxed, it didn't matter. It went up to the next board who voted, all right, and voted for Biden because they're all in fear. They're all in fear. All right, guys? For these reasons, all right, here's the big tamale. This is the kitchen sink. This is everything. I'm going to give it all to you right now in number 211 right here. For these reasons, plaintiff asks this court to enter a judgment in their favor and provide the following emergency relief. This is what we want. 1. An order directing Governor Kemp, Secretary Raffensperger, and the Georgia State Board of Elections to decertify the election results. 2. An order enjoining Governor Kemp from transmitting the currently certified election results to the Electoral College. 3. An order requiring Governor Kemp to transmit certified election results that state that President Donald Trump is the winner of the election. 4. An immediate order to impound all the voting machines and software in Georgia for expert inspection. 5. An order that no votes received or tabulated by machines that were not certified as required by federal and state law be counted. 6. A declaratory judgment declaring that Georgia's Secretary of State violates the Electors and Elections Clause of the U.S. Constitution. 7. A declaratory judgment declaring that Georgia's failed system of signature violation violates the Electors and Elections caused by working a de facto abolition of the signature verification requirement, meaning that it was a scam. 8. A declaratory judgment declaring that current certified election results violates the due process clause of the Constitution. 9. A declaratory judgment declaring that mail-in and absentee ballot fraud must be remedied with a full manual recount or statistical valid sampling that properly verifies the signatures on absentee ballots, envelopes, and that invalidates the certified results if the recount or sampling analysis shows a sufficient number of ineligible absentee ballots were counted. 10. An emergency declaratory judgment that voting machines be seized and impounded immediately for a forensic audit by the plaintiffs' experts. 11. A declaratory judgment declaring absentee ballot fraud occurred in violation of people's constitutional rights, election laws, and under state law. 12. A permanent injunction prohibiting the governor and secretary of state from transmitting the currently certified results to the Electoral College based on the overwhelming evidence of election tampering. 13. Immediate production of 36 hours of security camera recording of all rooms used in the voting process at State Farm Arena in Fulton County, Georgia from 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. and until 6 p.m. on November 3rd. 14. The plaintiffs further request the court grant such other relief as is just and proper, including but not limited to the cost of this action and their reasonable attorney fees and expenses pursuant to 42 U.S.C. 1988. Respectfully submitted this 25th day of November. Obviously, today's Thanksgiving, the 26th, but this was submitted late in the night, right before midnight, 25th of November, 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Sidney Powell. All right. Texas bar number 16209-700. And this was a hell of a legal document, a hell of a read for me, and I'm sure for you to listen to. But guys, you have to understand the seriousness of this case. If this goes all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rules on this, this is going to become a standard looking at all of the states in this country, not just Georgia. But even alone in Georgia, this turns everything around. And this isn't like Lynn Wood, who's doing his side of the case as well. There are so many cases by so many different people. Giuliani has his own case. Folks, this is gigantic. And I hope, again, with the bottom of my heart, I made this with love. I made this with caring. I know you, the patriots out there, the defenders of the Constitution, the defenders of this country, my digital soldiers, my patriots, guys, I know that it's you and I that have to spread this information and understand this information and take a real part in the legal process, the voting process, our rights in this country. We have to take a part. We can't turn a blind eye. It is now our time. And it is now or never. So, folks, I really, 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 really appreciate you sitting through 2.5 hours of this. But if you did it on your own, you wouldn't have anyone to explain it to you. And it would probably take 16,000 hours like it took me to go through it and do all the work for you. So I got you the pertinent parts. I got you the meat and potatoes. I got you the information you need to shut the leftists down and spread the word. This, again, was the 42nd episode of the American Reveille Podcast, revealing the Kraken, the Thanksgiving special. The Thanksgiving special, and we have so much to be thankful for. We've had such great news lately. We see the pieces on the chessboard coming together. We see what's about to happen, and the left's head is going to explode. So I just have a couple more little favors to ask you. One, if you're listening to this on Audible or on Apple Podcasts or any of the other programs out there with a rating system that's just audio, do me a favor. I need 5 stars from you. I need you to write a review. I need you to just give me 5 minutes of your time and do that for me. The more people that do that, then the more Apple, the more Audible, the more these companies move me up on the ratings board, and people actually see what we're doing. It's going to bring power to the American Reveille movement, the wake-up call. It's going to bring power to the right, and you'll be a direct part of that. So please do me that favor. To all those other folks that are listening out there, I'm on Rumble now, and I'm pushing Rumble real hard. So please subscribe and share on Rumble. Hit the notification so you can get what I'm given. And I'm still on YouTube, still transitioning off. So if that's your preferred method of watching, please go to YouTube. Please subscribe to the American Reveille on YouTube. Please hit the notification bell. Please make a comment. Let me know what you think. I appreciate all of you. My head is killing me. I pray that your families are with you, that you're together, that you have a plan. I pray that you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I, of course, pray for this country, for our Constitution, but I know in my heart that we are on the righteous side of this fight. We hold the moral high ground, and we have all the keys and watch all the doors. Ladies and gentlemen, I will see you Monday at our regular time for our regular podcast for episode number 43. And I'm sure over the next 3 or 4 days, we'll have a couple more articles and videos out for you. Again, thank you so much. I'm James Lane. I am signing the hell out. I'll see you next time. Ladies and gentlemen, this is President U.S. Grant, Ulysses S. Grant, unconditional surrender grant. And I propose we get rid of the Grammys, we get rid of the Emmys, and we start the Granties. And the Granties would be given to extraordinary Americans who worked their butt off and came from dregs and came from hardship and failed and learned hard lessons and still overcame their utter animalistic humanity and rose to great heights to do great things for this country. But I digress, because I'm not here to talk to you about the Granties. I'm here to talk to you about coming to Parler from whatever social media you're on. And if you're already on Parler and you're seeing this, that's great too. But I want you to go to our Parler page here for the American Reveille. It's at The James Lane. The James Lane, Lane. The American Reveille. I am James Lane. I'm a veteran. I'm the owner and operator of the American Reveille. And all you got to do is come to Parler, sign up, and follow me. You'll see a little follow thing here. Here, look, we can go to Megyn Kelly's. You see how it says follow right there? You want to follow me on Parler, if this thing will ever go backwards. There we go. And be one of the 7,500 people that love the American Reveille. We are patriotic. We are in your face. We are here for you, for the right. We the people, for the people. And we are fighting the good fight as digital soldiers against the left. The more people that join our cause, the more we can spread the message and we can beat down this evil leftist ideology. And if you're not watching this on YouTube, you're probably watching this on Rumble. And folks, Rumble is going to take down YouTube. It is the rising platform for uncensored voices, including many of your favorite conservative voices, including me, James Lane, here at the American Reveille. So when you're watching this and you're on Rumble, you're going to see right over here this little subscribe button. I need you to hit that button and subscribe to the American Reveille on Rumble. I need you to share this. I need to get the word out because we are a community and we are right. We are righteous. We are on the right path to victory. The left does not stand a chance, and we will prevail.